I'm not Zoom yet. Been sitting here for half an hour and just not even where I'm supposed to be. Okay. Yes, just I appreciate that very much. And yeah, just if I can just, what can be shared. That is what I have said for now. Perfect. Thank you.
So this question of so there actually it was citizen when I would get this transfer sealed all posting offer them.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Committee of the Whole for the City of Maple Ridge, January 24th. Time is 11 a.m. Madam Clerk. Sorry, I will call the meeting to order. And with that, I'll turn it over to Madam Clerk.
Good morning. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.12. Committee of the Whole is the initial venue for council review of information to ensure that council can debate and vote on issues at future council meeting. No voting takes place on bylaws or resolutions during Committee of the Whole. This meeting is being conducted through the city's one meeting platform. However, we are experiencing issues with the PrimeGov solution for live meeting management that are still being addressed by the vendor. In the interim, we will not be using the system for voting and speaker management purposes. Instead, council has been provided with voting cards, green for in favor, red for opposed, yellow for point of order. I will manually take note of the votes and log them into the system. To be put on the speaker list, please physically raise your hand so that the chair can add you to his list.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And as we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge that the City of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Move to approve the agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Doze, seconded by Councillor Carreras. All those in favor? Thank you. It carries. Adoption of the minutes for January 10th, 2023. May I get a mover, please? Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Schiller. All those in favor? That carries. There are no delegations. Moving to Planning and Development Services. Item 5.1, Mr. Goddard.
Good morning, Council. Here's our first item this morning. It's a subdivision and rezoning on McNutt at 12313. McNutt is a very kind of rural semi-suburban area. We've done a number of similar subdivisions in the past in this area over the last decade. Moving forward on a zoning bylaw 7433, it's 2018. This is the designation, suburban residential. It's moving from RS3 with the detached large rural lots to the 1 acre lot. And it's about 3 acres in size. There'll be 2 lots created. The red site shows the site. It's between 2 roads you can see there, McNutt and 272nd Street. It's a top of a hill, essentially. There'll be a subdivision line similar to what's created to the south. Suburban designation. There's no conservation watercourse on this land. There's the site. There's a house at the very front on the McNutt frontage, and there'll be a second one eventually on the other western portion of the site. Again, it's going to be 2 lots. It's a subdivision. It's outside the urban boundary, but it's in the land where 1 acre lots are permitted. But they have septic and city water is provided on the street frontage. There is 1 acre each going to be created. They'll be a bit larger than that. There'll be a natural development permit requirement because of some steep slopes on the site to ensure its preservation over the long haul. And there'll be a wildfire DP to ensure the structures are as fire safe as possible. This shows the survey plan. The subdivision line is north-south there. You can see the various trees and the various slopes. There's some significant slopes on the site and they'll be protected. So again, it's a zoning bylaw and moving to second reading. Public hearing will occur next month. We're recommending it move forward with the various covenants requirement. As the site is also safe, there's been no previous contamination on the site with the previous home use. That's been proven out. There'll be a contribution of 14,200 for a community amenity charge for the 2 new lots. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. With that, we'll take a motion to push forward to our council meeting for January 31st by Mayor Rubin, seconded by Councilor Dewitt. And with that, your motions on the floor. Mayor Rubin, the speakers list, please.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question. Could you elaborate what is the natural feature development
Sure.
for the slopes, right?
Sure, that's correct.
What exactly is that?
It's an attempt to try and preserve these slopes that are over 25% to ensure they're not logged, they're protected, they're not destroyed over the long haul. They're not built on, for example. So the desire is to maintain them in their natural state in perpetuity. So a covenant will be placed on those properties through that permit that will ensure that all future homeowners know there's a restriction on that land and they shouldn't be damaging it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
With no other speakers, I have my stuff to the speakers list, and my questions are very much along the same lines. First off, what and how steep are the slopes that are on the property? Secondly, if any services that are connected, is there water or sewer? And if not, then of course, the standard with the septic tanks that we throw in place, given that there is that sensitive
Right.
water release. So
Right.
that-
It's not a condition of the rezoning. Those really details are looked at the subdivision approval stage, which occurs after council gives it third reading. Those conditions are outlined in our preliminary review letter that I issued to the applicant, or the conditions of subdivision that will consider it. We always ensure that there is a building envelope, and then they have to prove out that there is a septic field site and a reserve field site to ensure that the septic systems can work to at least 25 years out within those systems. The slope areas, again, as I mentioned earlier, are protected through the covenant to ensure they're not disturbed over time. They're over 25%. That's the cutoff, which is really not buildable here, we've considered, and council's made that decision. It preserves kind of the natural look and feel of those areas of the site, which helps maintain kind of the integrity of the rural look. Thank you.
Thank you for those clarifications. Councillor Tan.
Through the chair, I don't have much knowledge around this topic around so tree cover with properties in the soil zoning. Could you sort of elaborate for me with a subdivision what that would look like?
Sure. And in the survey plan, you saw the location of the trees that are currently there. Some of those will be removed probably to develop the septic field and the building envelope for the new home. But many of them are going to be retained within that 25-degree slope area on the site. So that's the majority of the trees. Again, if trees want to be removed in those areas, they need to get a tree cutting permit through us. But again, we look at those details when we get to the subdivision stage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
It is through the chair again. I think I'm curious about the stormwater management around that as well.
Sure. Again, this is an area that has water courses on either side. So the stormwater management, because it's a very rural area, typically goes into the ground through probably a rock pit system. That's designed when the subdivision and the kind of the building envelope is determined. So it's further down the road than what we're dealing with from a land use question here, but it is looked at. But there's very unlikely that, runoff from this site, because it's going to be fairly low density, little lot coverage, will negatively affect any neighbor. And if it is directed to probably a neighboring ditch, which then leads into a water course.
Thank you, Councillor Tan. With that, all those in favor of moving this to the January 31st council meeting? That carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Moving on to 5.2.
Mr. Chair and committee, good morning. This application is for a project at 12121 232nd Street. It's for zone amending bylaw 7491/2018 is going forward for consideration of second reading. The designation of the site and the official community plan is urban residential and is proposed to stay the same. Currently is zoned RS3 single detached rural residential and proposed to be rezoned to R1 single detached low density urban residential. The site's approximately 0.42 acres and 3 lots are proposed. It's the map on the lot on the subject map. This is showing the urban residential designation of the site and the sites and lots around in the area, and the conservation designation for the creek across the street, across 232nd. This is a subject property on the ortho photo, showing the existing residential buildings on the lot. So as noted, the proposal is to rezone the subject site to R1 for 3 lots. The proposed urban residential designation supports R1 zoning in the official community plan. 232nd Street is a major corridor in the official community plan. The minimum lot size for the R1 zone is 371 square meters, or just about 4,000 square feet. And the proposed lots are ranging from a little larger than that, from about 382 square meters to 504 square meters. And the existing house and outbuildings will be removed if the application proceeds to adoption and subdivision completion. The lots will be accessed from a new lane on the west side running north-south, and a 3-meter walk dedication on the northernmost property line is also required to provide pedestrian access to the adjacent neighborhood to the west off Blossom Drive. This is the subject layout showing the lane extension. It comes basically dog legs off the lane that's existing to the northwest. The walkway, a 3-meter wide walkway, would be along the northern site line, and then a statutory right of way for storm and sanitary of approximately 2.55 meters. Also, just of note, there would be a turnaround, temporary turnaround at the end of the lane, because the lane is not continuing through at this time to allow for vehicles to turn around on lot 3, and that would stay in place until the lane continues all the way through. So the conditions on the screen before you, I'll just summarize them very briefly. They include the registration of the standard servicing agreement for the roadworks and other servicing works, the road dedication on 232nd and dedication of the lane, and also a covenant for a geotechnical report that addresses the suitability of land for development, and a statutory right-of-way plan for the turnaround on lot 3, the temporary turnaround as mentioned previously, and dedication of the walkway along the north property line of the north lot. And then a registration of a 2.55 meter right-of-way for the sanitary and storm services mentioned, and registration of covenant for stormwater management and tree protection and removal of existing buildings, and just confirmation that the site meets the Ministry of Environment site disclosure requirements for all rezonings and development permit applications. It's a standard requirement. And also the payment if the application proceeds to completion of 21,300 in community amenity contributions. Mr. Chair and Committee.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. With that, I'll take a motion to move this forward to our January 31st meeting, moved by Mayor Romy, seconded by Councillor Carreras. Speakers list. Councillor Ten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just observing that this property is fairly close to the town center. I'm curious about this, the suitability or feasibility of this property for something like the RT2 zoning that we talked about, triplexes, fourplexes, well, fourplexes or courtyard.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Tan and committee. The OCP does support the proposed rezoning to the single family, but it also on that type of designation could support an RT2 zoned lot with the size and the location on a major corridor. So there's options under the official community plan, and this applicant has chosen to go with the single family option.
Chair recognizes Mayor Romy.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a quick question. So it'll be rezoned into 3 lots. What, where does parking fit into this? Will they have their own individual parking, or do they have to park on the street?
Councillor Youssef, Chair, to Mayor Rumi and committee. The parking would be off the lane. So there's the lane, so the vehicle access would be there, and there'd be garages off the lane. Parking is not envisioned on 230, is not allowed on 232nd at this time, and there wouldn't be vehicle access to 232nd.
So they'll have their own
Separate garages on the back of each lot.
separate garage. And have we accounted for things like visitor parking at all?
The zoning bylaw just requires a double garage, 2-car spaces for residents and could be used for visitors. I would just defer in engineering, but I don't believe we would be permitting street parking for visitors or the like on that street. Engineering confirms that. So there's no street parking for visitors on the main road.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no more questions, all those in favor? Carries. Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Moving to item 5.3. Mr. McMillan.
This application is 24340 and 24360 102nd Avenue. It's for first reading of zone amending bylaw 7903/2023. The site is designated medium density residential in the Albion area plan. The existing zoning is RS3 single detached rural residential. The proposed zoning is R3 single detached intensive urban residential. The site is approximately 0.42 acres and 5 lots are proposed. So this is a subject property on the area map of the city, just showing existing lots all throughout the area of a similar, they all have the same zoning and similar lot sizes proposed here. And that's the context of the area. This is the medium density residential designation in the Albion area plan covering the subject site and surrounding area. And this is the orthophoto showing the actual built out smaller residential lots in the area. And then these 2 existing larger rural lots that are proposed to be rezoned and subdivided. So as noted, the proposal to rezone to R3 single detached urban residential for approximately 5 lots. The current medium density residential designation supports R3 zoning as it has in the surrounding area. The lot size minimum is 255 square meters, and the proposed lots range from approximately 255 square meters to up to 327 square meters for one of the lots. The there's a variance to reduce the lot depth to accommodate the road dedication and lot width on the corner lot would be required. The road dedication is such that it won't quite meet the minimum depth for the lots. Also, council would be considering an intensive residential development permit if this application proceeds past third reading. For all residential single family areas, there's no development permit required except for the smallest lot zone, which is the R3, which just confirms the type of house style, location of buildings, location of garages because of the intensive nature of the single family zoning. So this is the proposed site plan here showing the lots being approximately 9 meters or 30, except for the corner lot, or 30 feet wide, and the frontage on the street and the lane at the back, and the large amount of road dedication being required to increase the width of 102nd Avenue, which is 5.3 meters, thus necessitating the variance for the lot depth. So the recommendations are before you on the screen for this application for consideration to council.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. I'll entertain a motion to move this forward to our January 31st meeting, moved by Councillor Dewick, seconded by Mayor Rumi. Speakers list. Chair recognizes Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, just a quick question around, I mean, I look at this development, it looks like they're all quite small lots. Have they been rezoned to this more intensive, or are these going to be considerably smaller than everything around them? What is the size? Like, I'm just curious,
Sure.
what is the size difference compared to
Yes.
everything else around them? Because it looks like an intensive development anyhow.
Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Carreras and committee, the lots would be the same or exceeding a number of the lots around the area because a number of the lots in the past were under the previous zoning bylaw that we had that existed up to 2020, which allowed for a 218 meter minimum lot size.
Okay.
And now under the current zoning bylaw, 255 meters is the minimum lot size. So they're bigger than some of the lots, the same or bigger than some of the lots around.
Okay, so essentially we're just taking this last sort of piece
Yes.
and taking it back to what the rest of it was zoned to back in the day till it changed.
What has rural residential zoning now and rezoning, we're rezoning to R3, the
Yeah.
small zoning, which all the area around is previously
Around,
rezoned.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is kind of the last
The last
parcel of that
piece,
development,
yes.
yeah.
And the lots will be a little bit bigger because the zone size has gone up in the new bylaw in 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no more questions, we'll call the question to move this forward to January 31st. That carries. Thank you, council. Moving to item 5.4. Mr. Goddard.
Thank you, council. Our final item, the development variance permit. And this is a request at townhouse site just off of Lougheed. It's at 116 Avenue. It's addressed there because the property actually has 3 street frontages, 12977. You have received correspondence from a number of concerned folks about the request and hoping that they can get the relaxation to increase the fence height along the Lougheed frontage. This is the site. You can see it has an access on 116th Avenue where it is actually addressed, and that is a rear property line against the single family homes. The front property line is on Lougheed, and that's the critical component. We have a fencing bylaw or fencing provisions in the zoning bylaw, and it really is treats front yards differently than it does sides and rear yards. So the north property line is a north interior lot line. The south is a southern interior lot line, and the rear is to the east and the front yard is to the west. And the bylaw requires it to be a shorter front fence at the front, and that's designed and worked into our guidelines for multiple family projects. And the buildings were built in accordance with those guidelines, so it must have been a decade or so now. And we understand that the applicants are having concerns with people jumping the fence and visioning into their front yards, and that the units have been oriented to face the front yard, Lougheed, which is a normal design practice, and it's good design. And it basically is encouraging the views between the private space and the public space and back and forth, as well as to orient the buildings that way. So there's eyes on the street and that. But over the 10 years or so that the project's been built, the fences have changed and are aging, and the applicants are proposing to increase the building height. And staff are not in support of this because of those issues I spoke about, the design and trying to encourage connection between the streets and the dwellings as we see. So the original fence would have been 4 height, which is conforming to the bylaw. You can see the design here, the entire site, and you can see there is the orientation of a number of buildings there facing the Lougheed. So whenever we do face buildings onto a major street, we do encourage separations through the fencing and landscaping, and those mature over time. We've suggested that to the applicants as an alternative to just simply placing a 5-foot wall with no breaks in it along the edge. We've suggested also some articulation of that fence to improve the frontage for both pedestrians and motorists along here to create that friendly interface, but they've chosen to not. They would prefer it to be closed in. And so they've made this application. Again, it's a meter requirement under the bylaws, 1.2 meters. They're requesting a 5-meter fence. I'm sorry, a 5-foot high fence. And we do see a lot of these high fences along our major roads, but they're because they are placed on side yards or rear yards of projects rather than front yards. When we do see front yards onto major roads, we look for the shorter fence. But of course, council, there's an option in the report. If council does not agree with that, that's fine. You're certainly welcome to decide to allow the variance to go forward, and then they can create their fence. No building permit is required for this, but it does conflict with the design guidelines. But we're sticking to our point that from this design point of view, we would prefer a shorter fence to replace the existing one, but council's free to decide differently, of course. This shows the design of the fence today. It's more of a picket fence. There wasn't a lot of reinforced landscaping at the time it was developed. You can see the front walkways to the units come out onto the street. There is another good example of a similar design to the south on the west side of the road, but they have a significantly more landscape treatment along Lougheed. So they do have a visual buffer that's more effective than maybe what this project has. But you can see where the location of the fence is on Lougheed on the left-hand side, and the variance requested is to raise the fence by essentially a foot, but it's also going to be a much more solid fence. You won't be able to see into the project at all, and it'll be more of a blank wall, linear in design rather than articulated as this one is. So we're recommending that council does not approve the variance, but of course you are certainly free to listen to the input you've received by council and decide differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Before I go to a motion, I'd like to remind council that this is a venue for questions of clarification, not commentary, having received correspondence, especially to this application and the dialogue that's currently taking place. So just a friendly reminder to council that questions of clarification. May I have a motion to move this forward to our January 31st meeting, please? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Schiller. Open for questions and speakers list. Councillor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly that if these were if the townhouse development units were oriented differently, and it was the back of the units that were facing Lougheed, that the higher fence would be allowed, but it's because it's the fronts that requires the shorter.
Right.
height.
Through the chair, I should make sure you understand this. It's not really the structures on how important which they face. A single home could face a completely different direction. It's the orientation of the lot lines to the road that matters. So the front yard of any lot is the shortest distance along a road. So in this case, the shortest distance along this road has always been considered to be the Lougheed frontage, and that's why it's considered the front yard. The fact that the units, which is good design, have units facing the major street and then access from the unit to the street through a sidewalk, a gate, and that's good proper design. So that's why we encourage that in all of our design review processes with these sort of developments. But it is a front yard, and it should, according to the bylaw, have a shorter fence. The bylaw does not talk about the type of fence. You could have a picket fence, a solid fence, reinforced with landscaping, but it does not allow a 5-foot or 6-foot high fence is what some people install. And they do install them illegally, in fact, but we don't worry about that unless there's a complaint.
Okay, and so is it 6-foot high fence that they're
No, they're
looking?
proposing 5 stories.
5,
Yeah,
okay.
5
Are
feet, sorry.
there 5 feet fences sort of on adjacent properties at all?
Oh,
in
there
that
certainly
area?
are, but there would be on, again, you have to go back to what lot line you're dealing with. And most of them are on side yards or rear yards where you can go to a 6-foot high fence there, 1.5 meters, sorry. But in front yard, the bylaw is clear. It should be a 4-foot fence and no more. And then typically a landscape architect will add landscaping behind hedges, trees, and that to kind of help build up that barrier, let's say, visual barrier. But they need a variance for this to be approved.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. The chair recognizes Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. Just 2 questions. Hopefully they're quick. Just sort of in addition to Councillor Schiller's, is this the only one that's the front on that whole corridor?
No, there are others. For example, some of the stuff to the south, there are some, but most of the corridor lots that I recall are side yards and that, so they are allowed a higher fence.
Okay.
And let's face it, Lougheed is a difficult road to be fronting on, so I can understand their request. It's not as high as it could be at 6 meters, it's 5 meters, but it is a solid fence, and they're really going to turn the developments back onto the street. But from a staff's point of view, we have to stick with our guidelines, but
Yep.
council's free to decide differently.
And then my other question is, you talk about it being precedent setting. For me, precedent
Correct.
setting is make the decision that everything going forward has to change. But are we not able to deal with anything at a one-off? If we make this decision, does that mean that what is precedent setting in this
Right,
context mean
that's
to
right.
me?
Again, what I mean, precedent setting in the report is probably that, okay, we give it to one, others will then be requesting it, which is fine if that's council's desire. I mean, we follow your rules, but we'll continue to press the guidelines as they are. New development will be at 4 foot on a front yard setback. But any decisions you make are noted by others, I guess I should say. But
yeah,
your decision makers.
but we still have the ability. I just want to be
You do,
clear
you
around
do.
sort of
You
the
can make an-
legality
you
of the
can make an
decision
ad
that we
hoc
have to
decision.
make. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Carreras. The chair recognizes Mayor Rumi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If we're following the bylaw, then you're absolutely correct.
Correct.
In order for council to really understand this, what, like, if we're gonna change something, we have to understand the reasons why the bylaw was created in that sense in the first place. So what is it that we're trying to avoid in this case?
Sure. The bylaw is designed to, when you, let's say, think of it in a single family house situation, you don't particularly want to have a 6-foot wall along the street when everybody else has no fences and that sort of thing. You can live with a 4-foot fence. It's defining your boundary of what's private and what is not, but it's not blocking off the home. It's the same in multifamily. It's trying to be good neighbors. It's trying to allow a presence of the structures and that onto the main street, privacy in the rear yard. These are essentially front yards to those units as they're aligned to face that street. But you know, it's been there 10 years and they've lived in it for 10 years. They know what it's like to live on that street. So it's a decision that you're certainly welcome to make if you disagree with it.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. I understand the concept of going like really high, like 6, 7, 8 feet, which is not something anybody desires. But going from the 4 to 5, I just wonder, is there an opportunity to revisit this bylaw? Because when we look at their concerns about noise and privacy and security, I think from their perspective, those are realistic concerns that they have. So I guess the question for me would be, you know, going from I wouldn't want to see 6 foot. I think that's too high. That changes everything. But if a variance were given to this, would it apply to the entire complex?
No, it would only apply to the front yard, which is along Lougheed. Already they're allowed to go to 6 feet with the perimeter really of the fencing on the property. And you remember that bylaws, most people buy fences in a standard built prefab Rona type of style. It's 5 feet with a lattice work on the top. That's 6 feet, 1.5 meters. This one's just built to 5, but it's a solid fence. I don't know, you've seen pictures of it. It's a solid, no visual through it in any degree. And that was part of the concern.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no other speakers, I'll add myself to the speakers list. And looking at this, as Mayor Rumi mentioned, as a possible opportunity to re-examine policy, especially regulating fencing along major roads in our city. I had lived in the neighborhood for approximately 10 years and I'm quite familiar. So to the south, we're looking at a commercial space, and then to the north, there are single family units that do have a fence that is high. So I'm understanding both sides and I'm empathetic with both sides of the argument. And so as to, in my attempt to straddle the fence, have we had a conversation with the Strata Council in this case to soften the impact of the fence going forward, to possibly partner with some of our local artists to have an art display? I'm sure Raven and others would love to have. How long is the fence, the length?
Oh, it's probably 150 feet.
So 150 feet by 5 feet canvas. I think we can create some art there. Would that be a consideration that has been proposed, or possibly to, again, ease the impact of this fence going up?
Our staff have talked to them about articulating the fence a bit, talked about planting to help soften the image and that, and it was not received well, I guess. So we're proposing the being proposal is a vinyl 5-foot high white fence along the perimeter of the site. I believe there still be gates at least to the homes, but it's going to be reading as you drive by it and walk by it as a solid barrier.
Hence, an art display may soften that impact. Councillor Dozie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, to the staff, I just wanted to find out if anybody can tell me how old the existing bylaw by which this decision is being made, how old was that law?
It's part of the zoning bylaw. The fence provisions were reviewed there. They're relatively standard throughout the region, those heights. And again, you have to consider largely most fences are built on single family lots, and to change the bylaw would allow much taller fences along every single family lot on the frontage road. It could be a cul-de-sac, it could be a local road. So the impact of that would be quite significant, I would argue. So the current bylaw is regional standard. It's not different. And to review it, I'm not quite sure what we would achieve, I guess. That's what I'm worried about. There'd be a lot of work to do that to probably get back to the same point. So it might be better to just approve it as a one-off kind of variance, given the situation you're facing. But we're landing on the current policy.
You see, my concern is that the applicant has actually made a strong case for security and noise. And I think it behoves this council to also think about how we protect our citizens, because the reason I'm asking when the law was made was that if this law was, say, for example, 20, 30 years ago, then the population, composition of Maple Ridge will have been changed more than 2 or 3 times, and if security is an issue here, I would think that we may have to have a second look at that and see if there's any way we can do something, because for me, security will trump every other thing, aesthetics, if we want to say, because I think that what we're looking at here is more of aesthetics than security. So that's my point. So let's look at it from the perspective of, is the bylaw obsolete, or is there anything that we can do to ameliorate these people's problems? And my point is, if we need to have more time to look at this and discuss this, I don't mind, but I think that security concern is something very serious that we can consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dozie. Before I go to second round, do I have any questions from those who've not gone for first round? Second round, Chair recognizes Mayor Rumi.
Thank you again. And just trying to build up on this. If we were to approve this, do we foresee what the neighboring folks, any challenges? Would we be able to put any conditions? Like, I'm just wondering if they started putting this up, what are the neighbors? Are they going to fight this? Are they going to be in opposition to this? Or is this something that you think is going to just, okay, if we approve it, it's going to be able to move forward?
To be honest, I doubt there would be much concern by the neighbors. They are single family to the north, and they do have rear yards that are 6 feet high as well. That would probably be a problem. There will still be gates, as I understand it, in there, so people could in theory move back and forth. So that's a positive thing. The lands to the south are much more landscaped, so they have a visual buffer in a different form. So I doubt they would want to change it. Most of the new development that Polygon did to the south again have larger fences. I reviewed that because it's a side yard as opposed to a front yard, but it is really acting as a front yard to some of those units. So it's not that uncommon, but it's a design feature that we try and look to try and blend in new development with the major street. So if council, again, we're not going to die on the cross over this one. We're not too worried about it, but it's
thank you.
It's a need that they have, and that's got to respect that.
Thank you.
For round two, again, the chair recognizes Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To Councillor Youssef's point, if there was a desire from this council to approve this variance, and is there some sort of mechanism by which we can also add that requirement for some sort of design work on that fence? To
I
soften the
guess
look?
council could. I've never considered it in the past. You know, it is going to be kind of a blank canvas. It's going to be wondering if it's not tagged pretty quick. That happens, but you could. But again, it's we then have to worry about what we're actually going to get. Who makes that decision on what the artwork's going to be? What's it going to say? How that process might work its way out might be as complicated as just letting it go as it is. I would really not like to cross that bridge myself and have to get into that sort of detail.
Councillor Tan, does that conclude your questioning? Anyone else for round two? Seeing none, I'll add myself to the list for round two. Would there be the possibility moving forward, and I hate to do this on the back of an application, nevertheless, it seems to be that the discussion is moving toward a more policy discussion. Would we be able to possibly cooperate with the Parks and Recreations Department and the Arts and Residence Program to then moving forward, not only be able to utilize this space, but other spaces in our community to prevent the tagging and all else that goes on these blanket spaces and actually turn them into canvases and fodder for our local artists to be able to display their art?
Through the chair, that would typically be done on public property. Again, this is a private fence. We don't own it. They could change it willy-nilly after the fact. If we made it a condition issuance of the variance, that kind of runs into some interesting complications. I would prefer to, if council's supportive of this, they just simply approve the variance and allow the homeowners to decide what they want to do with their own fence. Thank you.
Mr. Pollock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just based upon some of the comments that have been made around privacy and security and noise, from the engineering side, from a noise reduction perspective, a wooden fence doesn't provide very much sound attenuation at all. And also, moving from a 4 foot to a 5 foot is, without seeing the data, I wouldn't expect that to be a very big or noticeable reduction. The second issue around security, the lower fence allows eyes on the property in terms of the neighborhood, and sometimes putting a higher screen in their frontage, people will still look over, but it also means that a person can access a yard without necessarily being seen. And somebody taking heed of that. So I just put those two issues out for council's consideration when they're discussing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Pollock. And with that, we'll call the question to move this forward to the January 31st meeting. All in favor? That carries. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Goddard. And with that, we'll move to, sorry. Yes. We'll move to community forum. Seeing that there are no public members in chambers or online, we'll go just before we adjourn. I'd like to announce a special notice of special council meeting immediately following the adjournment of this meeting. Council will hold a special council meeting at which consideration will be given to excluding public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter. And with that, motion to adjourn, please. Moved, seconded, and we are adjourned.
So